Chairman Thomas, Vice Chair Swearingen, Ranking Member Sonnenberg, and members of the House Judiciary Committee, thank you for this opportunity to provide opponent testimony for House Bill 314. My name is Gary Daniels here representing the ACLU of Ohio. While HB 314 is framed as targeting mostly vexatious requesters of public records from local governments, our concern is HB 314 will impact far more people, far more requesters, and will dramatically shrink the overall ability of Ohioans to learn and know more about how their government and elected officials perform and act. More specifically, the ACLU of Ohio opposes HB 314's provisions that, 1, allow government officials to drag public records requesters to court when they claim the requester intends to harass or disrupt a or the public office with their records requests, and 2, the part allowing public offices to hire private third parties to process voluminous requests and charge those costs to the requester or requestors. Regarding the first point, we are concerned this will not go nearly as smooth as supporters express and intend. The ACLU of Ohio has and continues to defend in court public records requesters who are repeatedly denied records they are entitled to under Ohio law. Such requesters include the ACLU of Ohio, as we too have our own front row seat experiencing the numerous problems, frustrations, and difficulties obtaining government records using Ohio's public records laws. In short, there too often is an atmosphere of any combination of hostility, friction, and indifference from government offices requesters must navigate in their attempts to receive public records at all, let alone in a timely and complete and thorough manner. HB 314 exasperates these problems by allowing government officials to determine someone is a vexatious requester if those officials have reason to believe those requests are intended to harass the public office or disrupt the essential functions of the government office or entity. Of course, such determinations are subjective. Our fear here is HB 314 will be used by government offices to improperly shut out these requesters they deem unpopular, pesky, determined, or the quote-unquote wrong political ideology or beliefs. That these government offices must first go to court and obtain a ruling allowing them to deny certain requests and or requesters the records they are otherwise entitled to obtain under Ohio law does not provide much comfort. At least in our own experience and with an awareness of others with the same problems, judges and courts sometimes have their own deficiencies in responding to records requests for public records. Yet HB 314 puts them in position to decide critical matters regarding Ohioans' access to pertinent government information. Similar concerns exist with HB 314 granting permission to local governments to use private third parties to process voluminous, a term undefined in House Bill 314, requests, and then charge requesters the costs of those services. With this provision, no one should be surprised if numerous requests are deemed voluminous, resulting in a paywall of hundreds and thousands of dollars your constituents will have to pay before they obtain records, information, and data of all kinds. In addition, it is easy to forecast some will not be able to pay such exorbitant amounts and will instead simply stop making requests, surely a preferred outcome of at least some government offices. There are other deficiencies with this section of HB 314. What happens when two or more unrelated, unaffiliated people request the same records from a government office? Can that office charge all future requesters for preparing those documents, even if the preparation is done or mostly done via a single previous request? Who exactly are these private third parties who will be facilitating requests? How can Ohioans be confident their lack of internal knowledge and experience with a government office will result in timely and thorough production of records? These are examples of some, but not all concerns. The ACLU of Ohio believes advocates of HB 314 when they say there are some requesters who are malicious, who abuse Ohio's public records laws and the problems that causes for government offices. However, we do not believe HB 314 is the solution. As currently written, there are too many loopholes, too much discretion that can be leveraged by government to deny people's records requests that are not truly voluminous or are not meant to disrupt or harass. For these reasons and more, the ACLU of Ohio encourages this committee's rejection of House Bill 314. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Representative Stewart with question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. I know there's a lot of fellow history buffs on this committee, and I always, when we get on this topic, remember that the founders literally barred the windows of the Constitutional Convention. They didn't take minutes. They wanted to have a full and fair exchange of ideas, and they didn't keep public records. And so I've always been kind of skeptical when we get into discussions of the cost, I've been skeptical that Thomas Jefferson would be thrilled over the idea of taxpayers paying somebody to stand at a copier all day printing 3 years worth of emails for a disgruntled former employee of the township. Speaking to how we do this, though, is your concern with the outsourcing or just the idea that we would try to quantify what these actual costs are? So hypothetically, if the local clerk takes an entire days of time away from doing public business just to make copies or drag emails from Outlook onto a flash drive, why couldn't we simply just charge for their hourly rate? If they make $15 an hour and it takes 5 hours, you get a bill for 5 times 15. Would that, keeping it in-house as opposed to outsourced, change your view at all?
Through the chair to Representative Stewart, no, unfortunately, I don't think we would find that any more satisfactory, because I think we have to keep in mind, these are the public's records. This is something that the taxpayers have already paid for. This is our information, not really necessarily the government's information, the government office's information, the government employees' information. This is information, data, what have you, that we are otherwise entitled to, and to say that we then have to pay to access this information that's been free for decades in Ohio just means that that's going to be less information out there for the public to be able to review, look at, analyze, digest, and see how their local government is operating. And so we see that as an overall negative, that it will shut out access to information rather than facilitate access to information.
Follow up.
Yes.
We already allow in the statute to recoup the costs of making the documents, but that statute is back when we were largely a paperless, a paper-based government rather than paperless. What's the practical difference between allowing the government to recoup the costs of the document and recouping the cost that it took to actually produce the document?
Mm-hmm. Through the chair to Representative Stewart, I think it means that a lot of people, that information will no longer be available to them. They won't have the money and shouldn't be made to pay that money to access this type of information. Again, the idea here, at least from our perspective, is there should be a facilitation of getting this information out to the public, not throwing up roadblocks in their way and saying, hey, you need to pay for this. Ohio, the General Assembly here has certainly taken that step with police videos and records. House Bill 315 passed during lame duck last year. Last session, I can't help but note that was done in conference committee after testimony was long over, so nobody had a chance to weigh in on those particular impactful changes with regard to public records. So I'm happy that we all have an opportunity now to talk about these types of issues. But House Bill 315 was really kind of part one of this, and now we're back with House Bill 314, this idea that Ohioans should be made to pay more and more money to access government information that they are already paying their tax dollars for.
Last follow-up?
Yep.
You have identified that you do think the sponsors are onto something, that there are requesters who are malicious, and this does cause problems for government offices. You don't like this solution. What solutions would you be okay with?
Mm-hmm. Through the chair to Representative Stewart, what I really hope is that the testimony of the ACLU of Ohio and other testimony and perhaps other contact that this committee is receiving outside of the hearings will result in an interested party meeting or two or something where we can get together and talk about these issues. I would bet whatever compromise would potentially be come up with, the ACLU of Ohio wouldn't be thrilled with it. That's the nature of compromise and everything. But we don't think that this particular scheme to do this is what works. I think what's happened, again, just sort of just being a fly on the wall and only seeing stuff with regards to what's happening here in the hearing room and how the sponsors have framed it, is they've listened to one side of this equation. And our sympathies are with those local government officials and having to constantly produce records via Ohio's public records laws, particularly when they're vexatious, and really when they are vexatious, because I do know that does go on there. And the sponsors make a good point when they say people gumming up the works means that you get your records requests even slower than you already do now, assuming that you get them in the first place. So I'd like to think that we could thread the needle here with something that's better, look at what some other states are doing in this regard. We just don't think that this is a good solution here because this is closing off information. And people, I think, at least in my experience doing this work, are more skeptical of government than ever before. And here we have government saying, yeah, you know what, and we're going to erect paywalls with regard to you getting this information. And, you know, at least with the police video stuff in House Bill 315 from last session, there was a ceiling that said you can charge $75 an hour up to, I think it's $700 or $750 total. There's no ceiling whatsoever for the maximum amount of costs in 314. So that would certainly be an improvement, but it wouldn't take care of all of our concerns by any means.
Representative Pickle-Antonio with a question.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question was pretty much answered, but I guess thank you for being here today. I agree with you that all of the records belong to the people. I mean, these are our records, and that we shouldn't put up barriers toward making sure that the public has access to the records. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. I agree with that. Having served in local government, I've also seen some of the other side of, and I'm not even talking about necessarily a malicious request, but any request. A lot of our local governments simply don't have the resources, the staff, in order to handle those requests. And really what I was wondering from you are what suggestions you have so that our local governments have the resources that they need in order to be able to produce those records requests.
Through the chair to Representative Pickle-Antonio, again, I'd like to sit down with stakeholders, you know, as part of an interested party meeting or meetings and talk about these very issues. Of course, additional funding to local governments so that they would have more personnel to comply with Ohio's public records laws, I think would be most welcome as well. Moving much more towards digitization of records so that they're much easier to get, to retrieve, and then forward on to someone else. And a subject for, you know, I realize another time, but is relevant to this committee, a sentencing database in Ohio with thorough and robust information from, you know, when a case is filed until its ultimate disposition would finally be most welcome in Ohio, and I think probably take care of an awful lot of this stuff, because then records would be much more easy to retrieve at this point. I don't want to say it's going to take care of every single problem, some of these suggestions or other suggestions people might make. Again, I get the frustration, you know, with local governments, but you know, at the same time, you know, if you look at this particular bill and it talks about, you know, intended to harass or disrupt and vexatious and everything, you take as an example, a real world example, somebody wants to determine, okay, who is in jail right now in, let's say, Cuyahoga County. So I file a public records request to give me the roster of everybody that's in jail that day. I want to know how many people are there pre-trial. You know, they can be out of jail. They just have to make their bail payment, bond payment. They can't do that, so that, you know, it's all in the world of bail reform and everything. But I want to know how many of these people there are, maybe what some of their offenses are, things of that nature. So I request it not just once, but I request the jail roster next month. And then the month after that, and maybe 2 weeks after that, because I don't want to know just one day. I want to know over time whether this, you know, goes up or down. Am I a vexatious requester at that point because I'm filing numerous public records requests on the same matter that might be difficult for that local office to comply with that records request, but still, I'm entitled to that information under the law. The fear here on the advocate's end is that now we'll suddenly become, you know, deemed vexatious requesters, that somebody somewhere will think we're intending to disrupt or harass a government office, and then we're taken into court as a result. And everything tolls at that point. Everything is delayed with regards to us getting those records while we fight this out in court. And, you know, at least at the ACLU of Ohio, I just contact the legal team, say, hey, okay, let's go to court. But not everybody has that luxury, of course, when you're thinking of people who are much more grassroots, trying to look at, you know, environmental issues, you know, police shootings, you know, financial malfeasance, you know, those sorts of things that you might have, you know, sort of a more, you know, might be independent, might be very grassroots, things of that nature, people of that nature, and the difficulties that they're going to have is one of the primary concerns of ours here.
Good. And any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.